Good afternoon, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and today I'm here to do a short review of The Trumpet Major by Thomas Hardy. So this came out in 1880, and it was originally serialised over the course of that year in the journal Good Words. As you may know if you've watched this channel for a while, I'm a real lover of Thomas Hardy, and I would say that Tess the Devils frequently makes it into my list of absolute favourite books. So I had high hopes. I always have high hopes when I start a new Thomas Hardy book, and I would say that The Trumpet Major is one that I probably have more mixed feelings about, in a very different way to my mixed feelings about, say, Jude the Obscure. So let's tell you a little bit to start out with about where the story is set and what it's about. So the book is set during the Napoleonic Wars, and I guess it's a part of that overhanging Victorian obsession with the Napoleonic Wars and this definitive turning point for the generation of their parents. You could liken it, I suppose, to the ongoing preoccupation that some people have with the Second World War. It was this massive change to the geopolitical structure of Europe, a massive change to the way that people lived in a social setting, and also a time of significant fear and civil upheaval for the general population. So it's something that continued to retain a degree of fascination going forward into the Victorian era and beyond. And even today, a lot of our best folk songs, for instance, come from the idea of the Napoleonic era, and they talk about, light dragoons and Bonaparte's armies and things like that. So in a sense, this was Thomas Hardy fulfilling apparently a long-held desire to delve into historical fiction. He didn't do a lot of historical fiction, so this is one of, I think, maybe 2 or 3 books that he did that were set outside of his own sort of time period. And it focuses on a young woman named Anne Garland and the young men who surround her, who all have some connection in some way to the gradually unfurling action of the Napoleonic Wars. And Hardy is, although he sets it in his kind of semi-fictional world of Wessex, in this case the book is set in a kind of a more realistic time zone and current events schedule, I suppose. So we see characters getting involved in the HMS Victory, which is a ship that remains very famous to this day. You can visit it. Or being sent to the Peninsular Wars, for instance. So we can see very closely the years in which Hardy set this. And he strove for historical accuracy. In the preface, he talks about how he got his sources and how he was influenced growing up in what he calls Wessex, or the kind of the area of Dorset, and the sort of southwest of England, and how he saw evidence of this very recent lived history, and how he wanted to kind of incorporate that into his book. So far so good. And I would say if you enjoyed Vanity Fair, for instance, or if you were really interested in the militia aspects of Pride and Prejudice, it might make logical sense to read this book, to have even maybe a slightly more colourful approach to the topic. But this book was a letdown for me, particularly towards the ending. I would say that I'll just tell you a little bit more, I guess, about Anne Garland. I'll tell you a sentence from the first page. We get her introduced and we get to realise that she's going to be the heroine. And there's a whole paragraph of description, but it ends, "In short, beneath all that was charming and simple in this young woman, there lurked a real firmness, unperceived at first, as the speck of colour lurks unperceived from the heart of the palest parsley flower." It is hard for me to believe that the author who wrote The Trumpet Major is the same author that had already written Far From the Madding Crowd and had created such a brilliant, vibrant, deep character as Bathsheba Everdeen, and then kind of takes a step back and creates this kind of slightly wet blanket type character that is Anne Garland. She does have her moments of spirit, she does have a moment where she's riding across the fields on a stolen horse and stuff. There are cool aspects. They're more kind of accidental, and they're very, I would say, probably overly romantic or sentimentalized, rendered sentimental, should we say, rather than being kind of feeling kind of true to life, I suppose. So yeah, I suppose the creation of Anne Garland as a character compared to Bathsheba Everdeen, who's fighting like a wildcat, or Tess the D'Urberville, so she's like a bird tragically trapped trying to escape from a cage, and Anne Garland is just kind of like a kind of blundering bunny rabbit who kind of like bounces from one thing to the next, and you never really get a sense of purpose from her, and she really just gets pushed from one guy to the next over the course of the novel. And it's very much a novel about a love pentagon, shall we say. So we've got Anne Garland, we've got three men who are interested in Anne Garland, who propose marriage to her over the course of the story, two of whom are the brothers, Robert Loveday, and also called Bob, and John Loveday, and John Loveday is the trumpet major of the title. And then we have this other woman called Matilda Johnson, who is also kind of involved in intrigues with all of those men, and she's kind of like the devil's the wrong word, the negative. She's the Mary Magdalene of the book, I suppose. She's the negative portrayal of women's sexuality, women's right to choose who they marry. There's a lot of kind of clues dropped in early in her introduction about why we shouldn't like her, like she faints when she shouldn't faint, when she washes her face, some of her complexion comes with it, and there's a lot of like quite undermining treatment towards Matilda, and I find that surprising from a man who was very soon to write Tess of the D'Urbervilles, that he is expressing these kind of negative attitudes towards a woman who he kind of honestly says like she'd fallen on hard times. She'd had a difficult period in her life, and that led to her not being able to work the way that she normally would work, which was as an actress, and we already know that actresses don't have the best reputation in Victorian literature, and yeah, that she's gone through this difficulty, and Hardy really seems to use that against her over the course of this book, and seems to say that characters who judge her because of that, like the Trumpet Major, are in fact the good characters and the moral characters that we should be looking up to. So I found that interesting. But my bigger issue, I suppose, with this book as a whole, I enjoyed reading it, but it goes on a lot about, you know, will she, won't she, this guy, that guy, the other guy. The main leading, the main man who we kind of don't want her to get together with, Festus Derriman, he's never a persuasive bad romantic interest. Like he's not like Alec d'Urberville, he's not like can't remember the name of the soldier that Bathsheba Everdeen falls in love with. He's not like the young woman that Jude falls for at the start of Jude the Obscure. There is no appeal whatsoever. There's no like sense of danger or interest from him. And at the end of the book, it all just ends. It's like he just reached the end of his patience with it. And I can understand that, because I also was reaching the end of my patience with it. And there's this storyline that's a bit reminiscent of George Eliot's Silas Marner, with a kind of box of gold that gets kind of passed from place to place, and it just like, again, that just kind of like, oh, by the way, they found the gold and it was all good. I don't really see that as a spoiler, because the resolution is so lacking, and obviously I didn't tell you what happened to the gold, but there is a lack of detail on that storyline, I suppose, and a lack of detail in the ending, and a lack of tragedy. I mean, this is Thomas Hardy, and the characters are involved in a bloody brutal war, and a lot of them are kind of to and from the front line. I was expecting to be sad at the end of this book, and I wasn't, and I was let down. Even though something sad is mentioned, it's mentioned in such a superficial way that you don't feel the emotional impact of it, even though you probably should do. I did just tag a couple of pages in this, mainly of the examples of Hardy's humour. So let's say something positive about Thomas Hardy. So he makes the joke of some characters are preparing for war, and the church bells ring, and one of them wants to go to church, and the other one says, "How can you think of such trifles as church going at such a time as this, when your own native country is on the point of invasion?" So a little comment on spirituality there. And one about a character with displaying some cowardice, which reminded me very much of Joss Sedley during Vanity Fair. And this character says, but they think that they've been invaded, they think that they need to go and like fight back the French, they think that the French have literally landed on the beaches and are about to invade, and this character is deciding that actually he's going to go and hide, But can I? Now hang flattery! Can a man hide without a stain? Of course, I would not hide in any mean sense. No, not I. If you be in love, 'tis plain you may, since it's not your own life, but another's that you're concerned for, and you only save your own because it can't be helped. 'Tis true, in a sense, but will it be understood that way? Will they see it as brave hiding? He's just trying to persuade himself that going to hide with the woman is a good thing to do. This character is also involved in, I should probably mention, some very coercive behaviour towards Anne, very much trying to force her into physical relationships with him, and that's never really... he never gets any kind of comeuppance for that. He gets dunked in a river at one point, but he never really gets any like balanced treatment for his behaviour. Not that literature has to be about bad people getting their just desserts, but I did feel like he was kind of let off quite lightly for what he did. And a final comment on fashion. The absurd extreme of female fashion, which was to wear muslin dresses in January, was at this time equalled by that of the men, who wore clothes enough in August to melt them. So on the whole, an interesting book if you're interested in that kind of time period of history. If you're a lover of Thomas Hardy, I would say it's worth reading it as a kind of like a completionist project, but on the whole, not my most highly recommended classic. I have problems with Jude the Obscure because it's so dark in places and so difficult. I wasn't completely wild about The Return of the Native, but this would have to be probably my least favourite Hardy so far out of the ones that I have read. And I will be trying to read more because I do still, in spite of this, very much enjoy Thomas Hardy. Thank you. Goodbye.